Israel-Hamas conflict has taken a heavy toll on human life, but at the same time, experts fear that a global economic downturn may follow if the conflict isn't resolved anytime soon. So, what's going on here? Everyone's trying to figure it out. You name it. It's a complex issue. Keep watching to know further about how Israel-Hamas war is shaking the world's economy. In the past, wars in the Middle East have left a substantial impact on the world economy, tipping many countries into recession as well. But how will this war shake the global economy, and how serious will the damages be? Stay with us and find out about the economic repercussions of the conflict and how an impending recession might just be around the corner. How the war is affecting regional economies. According to the managing director of the IMF, the war between Israel and Hamas has already started affecting the region's economics. The IMF is deeply concerned about the loss of life in the epicenter of the war, but at the same time, it's also worried about the decreased economic activity due to the raging conflict. The IMF chief has said that because of COVID and the war, the interest rates are high and the cost of servicing debt has also gone significantly up. The overall economic growth is at a standstill. And since there seems to be no pause to the conflict, the world is also getting more anxious by the day. Tourism-dependent countries fear the potential economic costs that lie ahead in the future for them, and investors are also hesitant to put their money towards a sinking ship. As the Israel army is advancing towards invading Gaza after the attack by Hamas, there's a lot of concern that the militias in Lebanon and Syria will join forces with the Palestinian resistance. If the conflict is not contained, then Israel might go up against its regional enemy, Iran, which is a known supplier of arms and money to Hamas. According to Bloomberg Economics, if an Israel-Iran war plays out in the future, oil prices will take a massive hit and could soar up to $150 a barrel. The global growth will drop down to 1.7%, which is not something even the richest countries can afford, because the world economy is already vulnerable. The world economy is vulnerable. The thing is, the Middle East is a crucial supplier of energy and also a key shipping passageway for most countries in the world. If there's a conflict there, it could send tremors throughout the world. If we go back to the Arab-Israeli War of 1973, it led to an oil embargo and years of stagflation in industrial economies. And because of that, world leaders shouldn't push for an extension of the conflict if they want to save their economies. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the world is still recovering from a bout of inflation. So another war in an energy-producing region could also rekindle inflation. In terms of broader consequences, it could also have a significant impact on the next US presidential election, where gasoline prices play a huge role in voter sentiment. But will this war remain between Israel and Hamas, or does it have the potential to spark the next world war? Stick around till the end to find out. Confined conflict or regional war? What do you think is going on? Right now, there are three possible scenarios as to how the Israel-Hamas conflict can evolve. First, it could either be a confined war and stay between Israel and Hamas involving only the Palestinian territories. Or it can lead to a proxy war between Israel and Iran as the conflict spills over to Lebanon and Syria. Finally, if neither of those two scenarios happen, it could end up in a direct war involving military exchanges between Israel and Hezbollah. In either of these scenarios, no matter what the course of action is, it will still lead to the same devastating consequences everyone expects. This means more expensive oil, high inflation, and obviously slower growth. While the magnitude of each of these scenarios might be different, in all the cases, a global economic crisis is a fate no one can escape, and you'll find out more at the end of this video. Economic impact of war. If we map out each of the scenarios, we can understand how the war will affect the economy in the future. If the conflict stays confined to Gaza, the US might tighten its sanctions on Iran's oil. According to initial reports, Tehran has already produced a lot more oil this year, approximately 700,000 barrels per day. This is because its relations with the US have become relatively civil following prisoner exchanges and unfreezing of assets. However, there's a chance that those barrels could disappear under US pressure, jacking up the prices by $3 to $4. But still, this wouldn't hurt the global economy as much because other countries can produce more oil to make up for the difference. Although a proxy war could possibly lead to some serious damage on a higher scale. Proxy war between Iran and Israel. In ongoing conflict, Hezbollah has already taken it up with Israeli military forces, threatening they will bomb an enemy army post with guided missiles. The problem with that is, if the conflict spreads to nearby regions, say Syria and Jordan, it could lead to a proxy war between Iran and Israel. Since Iran supports armed groups in both countries, the conflict can escalate pretty quickly. This will result in higher oil prices once again, following the same precedent as the war between Israel and Hezbollah in 2006. Back then, crude oil rose by $5 a barrel. However, today, such a war could send up the price all the way up to $94. If oil prices go up 10% and the stock market gets spooked like it did during the Arab Spring, the global economy could take a big hit. This means the global growth could slow down to the weakest level in 30 years, except for the COVID crisis and the 2009 recession. It's likely we could lose around $300 billion in output. And on top of that, inflation could stay high around 6%, putting pressure on central banks to keep interest rates high even as the economy slows down. But how does one region hold so much power to make global growth come to a halt? Conflict in Middle East could stall global growth. The answer to this can be traced back to the three scenarios we talked about earlier. While it's not likely a direct war between Iran and Israel will happen, if it does, it will definitely trigger a global recession. Think soaring oil prices and plunging assets, and inflation skyrocketing to new heights. Even though the price of crude might not quadruple like it did in the Arab-Israeli War of 1973, but if Iran and Israel keep firing missiles at each other, the oil prices could increase similarly as they did after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990. Keeping that in mind, oil prices aside, the war could also worsen global inflation. The impact of the war on inflation. According to this diagram by Bloomberg Economics, there's a chance that we might experience a 1% point drop in global growth if the war takes place. This means there will be 1.7% decrease in growth for 2024. Recessions can be tricky to nail down exactly. When economies grow rapidly like China's, outright shrinkages are pretty rare. But if growth drops to around 1.7%, that would fit the bill. It would actually be the worst since 1982 when the Fed jacked up interest rates to tackle inflation after the oil shock in the 1970s. A huge oil shock would mess up efforts to control prices globally, and we might end up with 6.7% inflation worldwide in 2024. That'd mean that the US would struggle to hit its 2% inflation target, and pricey gas could be a headache for President Biden's re-election plans. So, what's safe when things get shaky? Well, when geopolitical risks shoot up, people tend to turn to gold and the dollar. They're like the go-to safe bets during global crises. Gold has always held up pretty well during these shocks, and lately, even with interest rates going up, it's stayed valuable. And apparently, since countries like Russia and China are stocking up on gold, it'll boost its value even more. Investing in the dollar might see some ups and downs, especially since it moves in the opposite direction of oil. But in general, it's considered a safe place to park your money. Although the question is, what are other safe bets during a crisis? Economic crisis and damage control. Currencies like the Japanese yen and Swiss franc are solid choices, along with US Treasury bonds. Bonds have been taking a hit lately, but experts think they'll start looking attractive again as inflation eases. Aside from gold, commodities like silver and copper could be good picks because they tend to do well when economies are on the rise. But there's no denying that no matter how much damage control investors do, the Israel-Hamas conflict will have devastating consequences if not stopped. Israel-Hamas war. When could the conflict end? While the odds still lean toward a conflict that's contained, it would still be really tough for the people involved. However, that might not mess up the economy and markets too much. There were hopes for a calmer Middle East with peace deals and all, but now it's like a whole new round of chaos. But let's look for the light at the end of the tunnel. The way things are heating up between Russia and Ukraine, the trade war between the US and China, and the tension over Taiwan, it's clear that what happens in the world can really shake up how things work economically and in the markets. In the Middle East, it's always been kind of a hotspot for these tensions, and with Israel's conflict with Hamas, it's back in the spotlight. But the question is, can Israel contain the conflict? Will the world see a surge in oil prices just in time for the next US presidential election? And is a global recession heading straight for us? In our upcoming videos, we will dive deeper into the latest updates on the ongoing issues at a global narrative with multiple perspectives. Until then, you should check out how Israel's warning for the world is real. You won't believe it, so click now and know Israel warned US before the collapse. Let us know in the comments and subscribe to our channel for more videos just like this.